back to Fight Capital, where we step into the ring of combat sports business. I'm your host, Ryan Rappaport. Today, I'm excited to welcome back Liz, the GirlRilla Carmouche, a trailblazing icon in women's MMA and the reigning Bellator women's flyweight world champion. Known for her groundbreaking fight in the UFC and her impressive record in Bellator, Carmouche continues to be a formidable force inside the cage and an inspiration for the sport. I'm excited to reconnect, Liz. How are you and where are you joining from today?
I'm good, thank you. I'm coming out from Nashville, Tennessee.
I know you've been all over the place between Nashville, Southern California, all over. And I saw you were in Mexico recently. How have those stem cells been treating you?
Stem cells are great. So this is the second time that I've done stem cells with them this way, and it takes a few months for it to actually start having the benefits. Right now, they're building in the body, they're doing work, doing what they need to. But areas where I was having like numbness, pain, limited range of motion, inflammation, all of that is gone. So even under 1 month, I feel great.
Hmm. Well, I know it's hard because you're not allowed to work out, if I recall correctly. So I'm sure you're going stir crazy.
Yeah, a little bit crazy. I'm finally at the month mark, so I'm allowed to do a little bit more of the physical therapy. I can do some light cardio, but I can't do any martial arts training. So it's definitely really difficult.
Yeah, well, I'm sure it's worth the pain free and and the lack of inflammation that you get from it. So I'm sure you're sticking to it. But we're coming off of the PFL championship this past weekend, and I was just thinking in light of your recent win at Bellator in October, and then this subsequent PFL acquisition and the merger between the two. What do you think this impact's going to have on the kind of overall MMA market, particularly for the opportunities for female fighters and their kind of visibility moving forward?
I think, I mean, now with, I think Bellator, as we can kind of agree, was what most people consider ranked number two as far as organizations, notoriety, things like that. And so, but PFL certainly had a different market, I want to say, of fans that were kind of overlooked that they were bringing in. And so I think with the combination of Bellator and PFL can only be a good thing. It's, everybody wants that big payday. They want to be involved in the tournaments. And they know that they know the exact ranking system done on the right way. There's no favoritism. It's not just bias. It's not people getting their input and their opinion. It's done off of, hey, if you win the fight, you get 3 points. If you finish within the first round, you get another 3 points. And then each round after that, subsequently, you lose a point, where you can come out of the whole fight with 6 points. And then, like, oh, okay, well, out of all of the female fighters that have fought, I brought in 6 points, somebody brought in 5, 4, 3, and so on. I'm ranked number one. And each year, each season has a chance to like re-scramble, and you start off fresh. And that to me is really cool because it kind of gives you a fresh start. If you had a bad season before, you have an opportunity to reprove yourself, and you're not going based off of, well, you had 3 losses last year and you're on a losing streak. Like, no, you're a whole new fighter. And to me, that's exciting for the fighters that do make a lot of mistakes. It's exciting for the possibility of $1 million payout. Like that's, everybody wants that. For also knowing just where exactly you stand. Also, I like the science behind it with like the speed of the strikes and the accuracy that you get to see. I was watching the finals last week and just getting to see, I'm like, wow, that punch traveled. It didn't look like it traveled 19 miles per hour, but it was 19 miles per hour. One that was 23, and I was like, holy crap. Like for that person they just took right on the chin, 23-mile-per-hour strike, and they just kept going forward. I'm like, all right, that's kind of cool. So to me, PFL offers a lot in the sense that if you just take the science behind it, and if you just take the statistical analysis of each fight without the bias, that every fighter knows exactly where they're in clear standing, and there's no second guessing anything. And for that alone, I'm really happy for the prospect of PFL.
I'm sure you were watching on your millions.co channel. And it's funny you say that because my biggest takeaway is it removes the politics out of it. And
So
it's almost solely on your performance. And that's one, it takes away the matchmaking. So there's something to be said there, but it's not as someone who's a great ground striker like yourself and also can throw hands. It's not like, oh, well, let's put in someone who only throws hands. And so Liz can just eat them up on the ground, So I like that. And granted, I think it will kind of vary the matchmaking, but as you're bringing in more athletes and more world champions like yourself, I'm sure it's going to shift the product a little bit. But as the current women's Bellator world champion, how do you perceive this merge, and how it's going to essentially shift the business landscape? Because I know Don's really looking to be the co-leader, and while I still think they have a little while to go, I mean, do you kind of see this totally upending the market?
Yeah, I think it's gonna make a lot of big changes. I know that some of the fighters were not happy about the change. Some of them were pretty open about the idea of in prospect of going into PFL was unappealing. That there's a reason they went with Bellator instead of PFL. I know for other fighters, just being in limbo, and for most all of us, we found out about the merger based on social media. And so for a lot of people, like, wait, what do you mean? I'm part of PFL. So I think that was kind of not a cool thing to do in the way that they did it. So I think that that's going to be really difficult for some of the fighters. They didn't want to do like the possibility of a PFL champion versus a Bellator champion as like a super fight. But again, to me, that just offers more depth for each of the divisions that are already present. For the weight classes where they don't have a PFL weight class, that's where I think a lot of us have questions and we don't know what that means for us. Do we just have season plays very similar to PFL? Are we fighting the way we did normally in Bellator? So I think for people like myself, it just kind of leaves us in question and just wondering. We don't really have a lot of answers. But they just had the PFL just had their finals, so they have a lot to figure out themselves. And I'm sure over the next few weeks we'll have answers. But for right now, it's just leaving a lot of dust in the air and nothing's settled yet, and everybody's trying to figure out what's going on.
Well, with the corporate team there at PFL really kind of coming from like that tech and corporate world, it's definitely a different take on it. I mean, that's straight up your classic merger and acquisition. No one knows anything about it until the day it
I
has, so no
lost
one
you.
can throw any wrenches in. And obviously, it was like maybe one of the worst secrets in the industry. I mean, it seemed like everyone was pretty tuned into it, but still, that was my big takeaway from just the athletes that I saw that were there. And it's a completely different thing, right? I mean,
Mhm.
I've had an opportunity to interview several of the champions leading up to that and then after that night. And one of the biggest things people talk about is just the schedule. Fighting 4 times in 8 months is just so far beyond what most athletes are used to. So it
Yeah.
seems to be like that's going to be a consideration. Like, hey, do I just want to have my 2 fights in Bellator and then maybe be in PFL another year, or I want to come away from PFL on that schedule.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping, for me, I like that it's giving the variability for the fighters, but I know there's obviously going to be some integration that needs to happen there. Yeah, I know that you were also very interested in fighting in another weight class. I'm just curious, is this going to help facilitate that ambition?
I certainly hope so. I think with PFL not having a female 125 and 135 division, that certainly leaves a possibility of being able to do that. And with me advocating and being such a large voice for opening up a 135 division, I certainly hope that I can do that with them. And if that means doing it within their season playing, doing it that way, I'm totally game. 135, I'm not cutting weight, so that would be healthier. You want me to fight 7 times in 1 year at 135? I can do that. So
Mm.
I'm hoping that PFL is hearing every time I put out there 135, 135, and I can keep pushing for that because I think that would be really exciting to get that division. Because right now the only big name organizations doing 135 is just UFC. So there's a weight class to be had, and females that want to come up either have learned lessons and don't want to fight in the UFC, or just aren't quite there yet. Whatever the case happens to be, there is room for it, and we certainly need to be able to help facilitate that and get that going.
That seems like that transition and how people are coming over is going to be a huge part. But reflecting on the transitions you've had in your life, from Strikeforce to UFC to Bellator and now this acquisition, are you planning any changes in your career?
No, I think PFL makes a good fit. I had my time in the UFC, and while, like when I won the belt, Dana called me first thing getting on the bus as I'm headed back to the hotel to say congratulations. So as far as like negative animosity, I don't feel like the UFC has it towards me. And the way that I went out wasn't the way I wanted to, but again, like it only led to my success in Bellator, so I'm not upset about it. It's fine. But with that being said, I've enjoyed my time in Bellator, and I'd much rather see the possibility of what it looks like to have a future in the PFL and to continue with Bellator rather than go backwards and go into the UFC. And if Bellator ends and it's just PFL, then I want to pursue a career with PFL and see where that goes.
That's really nice to hear that Dana gave you that call and speaks highly to him, and I guess your relationship with the UFC as well. I mean, you served a big part there. I also know that Scott Coker, you guys have had a great relationship for a really long time. Any idea what's on the horizon for him? He's been pretty quiet.
Yeah, and exactly that. Like I feel like when I did see him and stuff and talking after Bellator 300, I really thought that was just the way that they built that one up. I thought that was going to be it. So they started saying like, "Oh, Bellator 301." Like, is this just a joke? Is this a gimmick? But we already know, all the rumors about PFL were happening. So when it really did happen, I'm like, I really don't know what's going on. And he was so tight-lipped about everything that I'm not sure what it is for him. I think he's been involved in MMA for so long, I can't see him stepping away from that. But at the same time, he could have made this big move with Bellator because he's finally ready to step back. So I have no idea where it's going to go. But when you combine two organizations, it certainly does make things difficult. If there isn't a cohesive relationship between the leads in that, it can definitely make things really um, just not a great environment for everybody. So I'm curious to see what he wants and then where that goes from there.
Well, I think from the outside looking in, not a lot of people understand what goes into just one promotion, never mind doing it for decades like Scott has. So I have a feeling I wouldn't be surprised if he was a little tired. What I will give him credit for, it seemed like he was really trying to do right by the fighters these last couple cards. I mean, 300, the one that you were a part of, I mean, three championship fights. It was a pretty epic night.
Yeah.
Obviously, 301, too, they were going hard. And it was just it was a great card too. I mean, the Matt Jackson fight, Patchy, it was great to see that. So I do appreciate that, right? He was
Mhm.
trying to make sure everyone was getting their fights in. But one of the things that I've really been kind of watching is this global reach that the PFLs bring. I mean, they have Dublin coming up here in the next couple weeks, or the 8th, I think, is when they're having it.
Mhm.
One of the things that also interested me about this acquisition, it seems like they're going to be leaning on Bellator for their European connections and kind of like where they sit globally. Do you see this as a way of maybe expanding your brand and influence internationally?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that one of the reasons that the Bellator signed me is for my upbringing, being raised in Okinawa, Japan. And so I thought that that was going to have a bigger play. And then also their cross promotion with Risen previously. So to me, it's even more exciting. You can only reach a larger market when you have everybody that PFL is reaching to, Bellator, and I have Risen taking over the Asian market. So it seems like it's a global domination. And the more that we can get out there, it puts my brand out there more. It leaves possibility for not just myself for more fights, but everybody in the organizations.
Yeah, and it's funny because last time we talked, I always wanted to mention that you grew up in Okinawa. You went to school there, and I always thought that was really cool. Actually, my first style of martial arts was a Okinawan karate called Shorin-ryu.
Yes.
And so when I always had this like affiliation with Okinawa for some reason, even though I've never been, so I always thought that was cool. But I know I don't know if it was leaked or if or where I even saw it, so I don't want to quote the source, but it seemed like PFL is about to make a push into Asia as well, and they've never really seemed to vibe with one. I think is the nice way to put it. So I'm sure, knowing some of the people I know over there, they're going to be making a pretty strong push there. But that's an interesting point because that is an open market. And I think a lot of organizations are looking at, it's like, hey, how do we get in there and how do we affect that? Because I think that's going to be a huge focal point as being a global organization. The UFC has had issues there as well. I mean, they just had to cancel that card in China and move it to the Apex. So
Yeah.
not an easy market culturally and professionally, but I have faith if they can find the right company to team up with there.
Yeah, it's definitely a great market. I mean, we've seen all the organizations with Pride, with Risen, with the ones we know that came out of there, that it can be done and it can be, it's an untapped market. And I think a lot of times, whenever there's any conflicts in the world, whenever there's like when COVID happened, usually like Japan and places like that, they close their borders. They don't want to take the risk. So I get it. And I don't think that's a dumb thing to do. I say, like, for business wise, it certainly has a downside to it, but as long as we can navigate through all of that, it has nothing but promise. And there's a huge fight culture there that would really benefit from and enjoy having an organization like PFL and Bellator represented there.
Yeah, did you have any thoughts on that unique season format? I know we kind of talked for a little, but is that something that interests you, or is it something that, I mean, what, like I said, some of the other fighters have had issues, not issues so much it is, it's a grind, right? Not that you're not grinding already, but
Yeah, as long as, like I've said before, as long as it's at 135, I have no problem being able to do that. I mean, I thought that the template that I created in my first year of fighting, that was what my fight career was going to be like. I had 8 or 9 fights my first year, so that's what I anticipated. That's what I was looking for. At 125, there's no way I could do that. There's just I need that to recoup, even if I'm not taking any damage in the fight. Just the weight cut itself, I definitely need more time to recoup post fight. And then just because I do my fight camps away, it will be difficult on the family. But I think in the long run, overall, I think we all see the benefits to it. So if I can fight at 135, I think the season play is a great idea. Just knowing exactly where you stand, you know exactly when you're fighting. It's not the guesswork of like, hey, how ready do I have to stay? Am I fighting in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks? I have no idea. You know exactly when you're going to fight. And that I like is knowing the tempo that I have to create for my fight camp, when to put the brakes on and when to put full throttle to the gas.
yeah, it seems like other fighters who've crossed over into that format, people who you're expecting to, maybe go to the championship based on their skills, where maybe they were hitting that brick wall when they're
Yeah.
coming up into that second fight and it's, a 6 week turnaround, never mind having to heal up. So yeah, it's definitely probably something to consider. And this isn't a knock, but you've been doing this for a while, right? I mean, like you've been, on top of the divisions for almost decades now, and it's a pretty cool thing to see. But there's all of these other athletes that are coming up. I mean, you really are kind of an icon for that. Is there any advice that you'd be offering to these up and coming fighters aiming to kind of achieve the success that you've had?
I would say two things. One is to truly be in this because you love it. The fights is just kind of like it's the cherry on top. The training camp, the learning, the growth, the evolution every time in fight camp. That for me is the ice cream and everything that surrounds it. The fight is just a part of it. It's just what you're working towards. But you have to love what they're doing. Like me, I answer you right now because it's been a month since I haven't trained, and it's not about having a fight and what do I have a fight in 3 months. So it's about like, no, I love growing and learning. I truly love MMA and everything around it, and I look forward to going into the gym and learning new things and pushing myself and trying new things and just evolving more within the sport. I think you have to have that passion and love for it. If you're doing it for fame, for money, for any other reason, you're in the wrong sport. Don't do it for that. And so I say, if they're passionate, they love it, love the training, let the fighting just be extra credit. It's just the extra part of it. And love being able to go into training every day and learn from everybody and stay open minded. And then the second thing to that is recovery. You may overlook it in your youth, but as you get older, you're going to realize how important it is. It only takes a few fights, you're doing great in your career, and then a small injury that can take you off. So I think prioritizing recovery, prioritizing training is the base of everything. If you put those two things ahead, you'll do great in sport.
Yeah, I think just from my point of view, moving in or looking back in the past, and all of these champions have had those long title reigns, it always kind of seems like it's a burden, right? Because you're not really evolving. Because when you're at the top of the heap, sometimes it's like, oh, this is what got me here. So to hear you say that and be like, hey, it's the fun of it that is keeping me going and keeping me growing. I think that's beautiful. And the one thing I'll say as well, just as a fan of watching you and following your socials, is that you're always working with awesome sponsors. And last time we talked about kind of like how important they are to you, not just professionally, but personally, and that the companies you work with are kind of like family. Are there any sponsors you want to shout out, or kind of anyone you want us to put on our radar now?
Yeah, I would say a big one that gets overlooked is like mouthguard sponsors and quality ones. And over the years, I've worked with a few different ones. Every time that there's an offer for like a free mouthguard, like being with the UFC, being with Bellator, companies will come up and be like, "Hey, we'd like to offer you one." I'm like, "Well, I'll try it," and I've ruined them within the first few days of training. But the one that I have that's been like solid that I wear in all my training camps, all my fights is GirlRilla. And he works with the dentist and he actually does like this really cool mold, both of your top, your bottom teeth, how they mix together, how you bite, how your jaw moves, everything. So it's the best quality I've ever seen. And I've been using that. I had the same mouth guard, for like 8 years. and that still worked through. Whereas I'd get other ones where I try it for a few days and I bit through it. So Virtue Girl's been a great sponsor, and then he's also just a really good person. Like, he takes care of the fighters. He's a good family guy. Like, when I'm back in San Diego, I meet with him for dinner, not because he's my sponsor, because he's a friend. Like, he's a good person. And like I said with you before, the relationships I make with sponsors now isn't as much about what we can do for each other, but about having a good relationship with somebody. So he's somebody, Ryan from Guard Your Girl, somebody I consider to be a friend, and I really enjoy his company. Wind and Sea Coffee is a great guy. He not only, like, he gives so much of his money, he's making CBD coffee, he's a veteran, but he also gives all of his money to these nonprofits. So he's not taking anything home from it. Like, there's no benefit to him. He just wants to help other veterans and raise out ways. So those are two people and two sponsors that I really care about, that I'm grateful for having in my life.
That's beautiful. I know that you're a caffeine fiend like me, so always having people like that in your back corner are amazing. Well, Liz, really looking forward to seeing how this plays out. I think that the PFL is lucky to have you within their mix, and that's part of this, right? Is getting people of your quality and skill level into their organization, or at least within the field of whatever it's going to look like moving forward here. But really excited for you and excited to see what happens next for your career, with whether it's Bellator or PFL.
Thank you. It was great catching up with you.
Yeah, you as well. We'll talk to you soon.
All right. Have a good one.